Welcome, dear sisters. Welcome. This is Leonor Murciano-Luna, for those that don't know me. And I wanted to talk today a little bit, spend some time really speaking about what I call the 4 medicinal languages, the medicine of ancient feminine wisdom that we are now, coming into consciousness, because most of the feminine wisdom of the feminine lunar era, which was over 5,000 years ago, most of that wisdom that was passed on from generation to generation, and it was oral. It was before the advent of written language. Most of that has been lost. The temples have all been gone. It was most of the women, have been silenced through all of the trauma and all of the collective trauma. And so the feminine wisdom, the ancient wisdom, which is awakening now on our planet, is really about coming back into the wisdom of really knowing that the sacredness is within us. The sacredness is within all of the material realm and all of creation. And it's really the restoration of the sacredness in many ways, right? In our own life and in the life of the planet. So it's about really honoring the sacredness of the earth, connecting with the earth, and activating our own spiritual dimension so that we can stop acting only and functioning only from the place of separation from only our material reasoning, human perspective, and really connect and be in union with our spiritual dimension. But going back to the ancient feminine wisdom and these 4 medicinal languages that I really feel like it's really the core medicine of the feminine, of what the feminine, what do we want to say? This whole feminine era, this era of sovereignty, the feminine consciousness, and part of the principles are really about. It's all interwoven in there. And so one of the medicines of the feminine wisdom is the drum and the rhythm of the drum and the sound, which we're going to talk about it next, but really the rhythm, the drum, the pulse, connecting with the pulse. And the drum symbolizes that pulse of life itself, right? That life force, that Shakti energy that comes through. So the drum is one of those tools that we are discovering. And as I've mentioned before, Lane Redmond was the drummer that brought through and wrote about this in her marvelous book and brought it into our awareness and into our consciousness. And so all of my drumming, and I use drumming for healing, is really in her style, in her style and in her honor, because she wrote the book when the drummers were women, and really brought to our awareness how drumming was used originally by the women for healing, for ritual, for connecting to the divine and connecting and into the sacredness of our own being, of the earth, of the community. It was used in the circles, the women's circles. And so, and all the way back to 3,000, at least 3,000 BC, if not more. And it actually depicts it through all of the statues and prints and paintings and caves. You see the women and the drum. You actually see the frame drum. And so now it's known that the goddesses use the drum. And there's many, many, many representations of that through our art history that we have of the goddesses. But nonetheless, the drum is one of those medicines, and it connects us to the rhythm of life, and it allows our systems to regulate. It really is a healing tool. I talked about it in another video about the power of the drum and how I use the drum in connection with the I Ching and your astrology to really look at what your signature, each person has their own signature rhythm. And you have a few of them. You have the one that correlates with the moon and the sun, and you have another one with the different planets like Venus and Mars. And so depending on what you're needing to align with, what you're needing support in, what vibration, what frequency, you can use those rhythms to connect. So the drum is number one. Number two is sound, as I mentioned already, and sound of using your voice. So voice has always been used by a lot of the spiritual practices of indigenous cultures, and it's a really powerful tool when we use our voice. When we use our voice, even humming, certain sounds will connect us to certain aspects of our nervous system. And it is a healing tool. It is a healing tool that works, on our immune systems and our nervous systems. It helps to, put us into, move us out of fight or flight or even freeze, responses in our system. And it works with anxiety and depression and all sorts of different ways. Any disorder that is going on physically can be affected by these things that I'm talking about. And so sounding is a really, really important. Sounding and chanting and sounding organically, whether it's humming or using sounds with frequencies and chakras. There's many ways to use sound, but it's organic sound. It's not about performing. It's not about singing. We've really gotten accustomed to using singing and sound as a performative, only kind of like really narrowed it to be, something that is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is really our organic sounds. If you think of ourselves even before language, before we spoke whatever language, if you're listening to this, you speak the English language, but before language, language narrows our sounds into these, vowels and words and, sentence structures, etc. But if you really start to open that up and allow yourself to just sound, whether you want to sound like the birds or like a different animal, or just make silly sounds. Kids do this all the time. And these are ways to actually expand the energy that's moving through our body and help us also heal some of the constrictions. We hold a lot of constrictions around our thyroid, especially for women, and help us to break through some of those constrictions from just the whole history of women and the oppression of women in general for the last 5,000 years. So we do hold a lot of tension in our body, and this helps to break it through and bring us into a deeper state, you could say, or greater union with our spiritual dimension, with our energetic body, and allow us to really break out of the calcified responses and that we have in our own body. So sound is the second one. Then thirdly, we have our emotional body. So our emotional body is one of those other medicinal languages. It's a medicine. It's a way to move the energy And when we haven't been able to move the energy of our emotional body, when something happens to us and our expression of it gets cut off for whatever reason, then it actually stays stored in our nervous system. And that becomes what we know as trauma. And that response, in many ways, needs to be addressed and needs to be, it's almost like we need to go back in there and allow the full expression of that in order for us to heal these traumas that we've inherited and the traumas of our own personal lives or collective trauma. And so we need to go into these places and allow that expression and allow that. A lot of us have like freeze response in our nervous system, and we may not feel anything at all, and we may be shut down. Other times we feel anxiety and we feel a lot of the fight or flight response, which may come more as anxiety, or we may feel depression, etc. The point is that through feeling is a big part of how we heal. We have to allow ourselves to become conscious of what we're storing there and allow it to move. It's like a river. It's like if we feel the river of our emotions, if we allow ourselves to feel them, it will take us right into the ocean, right? It will take us into the ocean of our being, which is our, being in union with that divine essence within us, being in union with the oneness, and feeling, that safety, and feeling that stillness, and feeling that peace, because that's actually inherently within us. Right? And so when we have places, and we all have places that we have not been able to continue that flow, that are stuck, that are stored in our nervous system, then we actually cause, we're in that kind of pain, we're in that suffering. And so connecting, becoming aware of our emotional body, where we feel stuck, where we feel frozen, and developing a relationship with our emotional body and with our emotions. The emotions have been shamed for thousands of years. It's part of the shaming of the feminine. And so, we only have certain acceptable emotions. And for women, that's not a whole lot of emotions. For men, there's a lot more anger that's accepted. There's a lot more I would say anger in general, that's accepted. But in general, grief, sadness, crying, these are all ways in which, especially allowing the emotions to flow. It's like allowing the water to come through. And so it's really important to release the shame. Shame keeps us kind of in that bubble and keeps us shut down in many ways. So to connect, feel the shame, feel the fear, feel what is underneath that, grief, sadness, all of these things that are painful, that aren't pleasant, but that in many ways we didn't get to. And maybe it's anger and rage, or maybe it's a combination of all of this that we didn't really get to fully express in most of our childhood perhaps. So, and then there's also the collective aspect, the collective trauma that's been passed down, like the shame. And we've been in a survival era of what did I want to say? We've been in the survival era of fear. So we've been kind of indoctrinated through fear. So there's a lot of fear in our system. And because of the fear and shame layers, it's almost like you can't really get to the fear. And so most people are comfortable saying anxiety. It's like, oh, I experience anxiety. And don't really connect that with fear. But anxiety is really what we're calling fear, right? It's really the core. It's a root emotion. when we don't feel safe, and we don't feel safe in our bodies. And so the emotional body is the third language. And the fourth is really the wisdom of the physical body. So the wisdom of the physical body, in our physical body, we hold, we store everything that hasn't been able to be expressed, and that needs full expression in order for us to feel that connection with our true self, with our divine self, with our essence. And that's where the peace is. That's where the safety is. That's where we feel good. And when there's a lot of kind of what I call gunk in those layers, there's a lot of feelings, we either shut down, and when we shut down, we can't feel the good or the bad, right? We can't feel, because it's like the whole system is shut down in many ways. And so starting to feel, starting to become aware is really an important part of connecting with the wisdom of the feminine consciousness and the feminine principle, so that we can awaken to what really is in the way of the deep love, of our deep essence, of our soul, of the wisdom, of the peace, of the safety, so that we can feel safe in our bodies, which is really what all of this work about collective trauma, and this is what we're healing. We're healing all these places that we don't feel safe, that we're disconnected from oneness, from the peace. And so these four are really important pieces of working with the feminine principles and integrating this medicine for our healing, not just for ourselves, but if we're also wanting to heal others, it's really important that we do this for ourselves, that we get to play in this ground, that we get to explore, our emotional body, our physical body, what is our relationship to each one of these? What's the relationship to rhythm and to the primordial essence of life itself? What is our relationship to our emotions and our emotional body? What is the relationship to our physical body and our relationship to our voice? So all of these are really, really powerful tools. I use these in our community that we gather. We gather twice a month in our Feminine Path community. It's all about exploring the feminine path. It's all about connecting. It's a path of healing. It's a path of connecting to our essence, connecting and coming into union with our divinity. It's a spiritual path, but it's also a physical, emotional, mental path, because it's really important. We are all of those things, right? We're not just spiritual, obviously, but we're not just physical. It's like, how do we bridge those together so that we can experience all these realms of the ways in which we as souls are, living in this dimension, that we're experiencing in this dimension on a moment to moment. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and share the thoughts. And if anyone is interested, you can come and join us in our group community. It's for women, and it's all about healing and empowering and awakening to these feminine principles, either as yourself to heal and to empower yourself, or for those that want to step into greater healing, because working with this on these levels will open up to really explore more about the feminine principles and healing in general. So thank you very much. Many blessings.